The digital transition. The Digital Transition, brought to you by Fulton Trotter Digital, a podcast series created to assist those tasked with implementing digital strategies, where we will share our knowledge and experiences to support you in your transition. Welcome to the Digital Transition, podcast number 10. I'm your host, Nathan Hildebrandt, and today I'm chatting with Bond Bryan Digital's Emma Hooper. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us today, Emma.
That's okay.
So I'm embarrassed to say I always forget your surname, and I think it's because I'm so used to seeing your Twitter handle, Little M. So firstly, Emma, for those that are not aware of who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I started out, I have an architectural degree. I started out as a architectural technician. So I've been in the industry 12 years, 10 of those was as a technician. And I suppose as a technician, I got to produce lots and lots of information. I started out on a drawing board at university, and then when I entered industry, I started getting involved in 2D CAD side of things, particularly AutoCAD and MicroStation. Found I had a real sort of passion for software and sort of got a bit bored of that. And 10 years ago, I was introduced to a software called Revit, which I taught myself. And kind of starting out with retail clients where they had sort of more defined standards. They were bespoke, but we did have standards and rules in terms of information. And when I kind of then went away from the retail side, I found that there wasn't any rules for creation of information, and it just seemed a bit of a free-for-all. So that's kind of where I then started to turn to the industry standards to help me sort of structure my information better, and the models especially, with sort of BIM, the whole sort of information side became even more complex, and you need standards more than ever. And I also did quite a bit of sort of work around IFC in terms of manufacturers' content. So I then started to look at IFC in terms of how that could be applied to a project and how I could structure my Revit models around IFC to give me some consistency. And so that's where it kind of all started in terms of that. And then there was also the process side. So I started to see projects in a different light. I started to see them in terms of different inputs and outputs, and much more sort of systematic from more of an information perspective. So again, I started to read the industry standards around all the process side, the BIM standards and everything, and start to join them up really. And that's kind of my background. And since then, I'm now an ambassador for the UK BIM Alliance, and I'm also on the British Standards Institute to actually help start writing the standards myself. So, it's been a bit of a journey.
You've skipped one important part, I think, in your description of your journey, and that you're actually a co-author of a book.
Yes, I've also done that as well. So from all the work I did in terms of Revit and IFC, I was asked to help Bill East write the Revit book for Kobe, so delivering Kobe using Autodesk Revit, in which we focused on Kobe as an output, and there's quite a lot of good stuff about the background of Kobe in that book as well.
Bond Bryan Digital's quite unique in the sense that Rob Jackson, that we spoke to earlier in an earlier podcast, was a co-author for the ArchiCAD side of the fence, and then you, being an expert in standards and on the Revit side of the fence, co-authored the Revit book on the same topic. Now, obviously, it's an architectural office being Bond Bryan. Can you share with us the role that you actually play being part of Bond Bryan Digital's team?
Yeah, so now I've kind of sort of jumped the fence a little bit in terms of what I do. My job title is a digital information specialist, and what that is, my role is kind of split into two. So half of that is actually working on projects still, so actually doing information management on projects. So we either work with clients to help them define their requirements, but also then plan strategies around actually delivering those requirements. I also help delivery teams in terms of process and technology to deliver them. So, a big part of my role is actually helping Revit users to get good quality IFC outputs out of Revit. And then because of that, we can then actually check them. So we do a lot of checking of models in tools such as Celibri. And then we also work for contractors as well to help them, again, define requirements and look at the delivery strategies once they come on board. And then the other sort of half of my sort of role is around R&D. So actually kind of looking at, in particular, requirements, also trying to sort of rationalise what we do at the moment, because how we go about defining information is very ad hoc at the moment, and there's a lot of waste.
Mm-hmm.
But also looking at sort of the standards and how we can then start to actually apply them and the practical application to projects. Because, it's all right having standards, but, it does take a lot of work to actually work out how do you implement them on projects. And, there's a lot around that as well. And also, the information requirements part, it's complex. If you do it right, you need to have that knowledge of process, but also the technology side as well.
I guess we've kind of kept it quiet so far in this conversation about what we're actually going to talk about today. And, we thought that we'd talk today about procurement, because I guess procurement's a very important component of it. And once again, it's all about understanding what you want, but from a client, and when you want and how you want it. But from a client's perspective, we want to try and cover that and about the concept of procurement processes for this, and the key areas being the standard components of what they want, when they want it, and who provides it. And sometimes within procurement, people will also include how they want it delivered. Are you able to discuss in detail if there are any specific differences with procuring digital deliverables to physical assets that people are used to?
See, my first response to that, thinking of it from more a theory point of view, is really there shouldn't be any differences. One of the things I think we need to help clients realise is that information, not just digital information, any type of information, it is an asset and it has tremendous value for them. But at the moment, we don't really think about it in those sorts of terms. It's just really as important as the physical asset, really, going forward, and that we can actually gain value from it, and the information can actually work for the client. Clients need to understand that the requirements are kind of fundamental part of the whole sort of digital deliverable process. For me, really, a sort of a physical asset, it's just the same as information at the end of the day, and it should be treated the same.
Yeah, and I guess the question then gets raised is, and I know in Australia we have these kind of issues where people are concerned in and around contracts, but and I'll let you answer first before I put my opinion on it. It might sway it either way, but do you think a project contract really needs to be amended to take into consideration digital deliverables?
I think it all depends on the type of contract, the type of procurement route as well. Some contracts will have clauses in them to define, can have clauses in them to define digital deliverables. But, if we're following, the process in ISO 19650, then you've got the information protocol, which is meant to capture those sorts of elements, and that's then appended to the main contract. And really, I think it's all about, defining those requirements and then putting them into contract, actually understanding what your needs are, exactly what you want, being really sort of black and white about it. At the moment, clients just say, well, I want BIM level 2, but what does that actually mean? There's nothing really tangible there to deliver, nothing to base anything against, that the requirements actually become the acceptance criteria for the projects and are benchmarks that you can actually then measure against at the end of each stage. Those are what really need to be captured within that sort of contract sort of setting. There's a lot of sort of activity around all that at the moment. In the UK, we're producing guidance for ISO 19650, in which we're capturing a lot of the legal side of things, and then we've also got the Winfield Rock report here in the UK, which is a really good sort of report, which sort of talks about the state of where we are in terms of all that, and if anybody sort of has questions regarding the legal side, I definitely suggest reading that, and even on things on Twitter, there's been for legal account as well, which is full of lots of useful sort of knowledge as well.
So my take on it is that, and it might differ from the experience that you've had from your end, but I guess from my perspective, the way I view it is that if the information deliverables are 100% clear with regards to what they want, when they want it, and who has to deliver it, then there shouldn't be any real need to change the contract because they're clearly defined deliverables, similar to how clearly defined the requirements for a built asset would be. And is that the kind of view that you share as well?
Yeah, there isn't really much change. We seem to get fixated on this idea that BIM changes everything when really it doesn't. It's just a better way of working, structuring information better. Information has always been there. We've always had to deliver it. It's just that we've never really done it well in the first place. And now we have a lot more that we have to deliver. And, there's a lot more that's now visible because technology produces so much more. It's all about going back to basics and really thinking about the information and delivering what is actually required. And that's what it's all about. So, in terms of that, it's not really that much different. It's just that, there might be some slight differences in terms of ownership and things like that, really. So, it's nothing to really get really over hung up on about. And I think that's what kind of one of the issues is at the moment. We do. And I think that scares people sometimes and puts people off.
That's one of the least things that I'm scared of. One of the key things that people look at when it comes to optimizing the process of building information modeling is procurement methodologies similar to integrated project delivery teams. So where everyone is part of the team and how it all goes. So you were involved in one of those startups. Are you able to share your experiences with us with regards to this process and any of the perceived benefits or risks that you experienced in beginning that journey?
Yes, so I was really fortunate enough to work on the world's first integrated project insurance project. Started way back in 2015 now. And what integrated project insurance is, or the term now for it is insurance-backed alliancing, and how that actually differs to other sort of integrated project delivery sort of procurement models and alliancing models is that you have one project bank account. There's one collaborative contract that everyone signs up to. It's a new type of contract. And there's also just one project insurance. So individual companies don't have their own PI insurance. It's just covered under the one. And everybody is selected from the start, including the contractor, but actually on IPI projects, they're called the constructor because, it is so different. There isn't that contract there anymore. And, also FM can be selected up front. It's all about very much changing mindsets and behaviours, putting people first, and the focus is around about how we work together. This is true collaborative working because the framework is there to actually do that. It's not, working collaboratively is actually very difficult, and you need to have those sort of measures in place to help that. With the one insurance, hidden agendas are removed, and there's a no blame culture. So everything operates on trust. And it also gives you the freedom to innovate and look at new ways of working and things that you would never really ever think about on normal projects. So working on that project, for me, my biggest sort of lesson was how much everything is centered around people, in particular information management. For me, it's all about people first, then process, and then technology. And working as one alliance, it's like a virtual company. So you're all in it together. You're all working to one target cost. You have a pay and gain share sort of incentive behind it all. So you're all in it together. You all have to work together to earn that sort of that reward at the end of it. And then in terms of sort of the information management side, it just goes hand in hand with it. Having everyone on board from the start means that, I could plan strategies. I could plan each and every information exchange because I knew what everybody's requirements were. I knew what technology was going to be used. And I could plan, the handover exchanges well in advance. And on that project, we got to do sort of really simple things in terms of handover information that didn't cost money. Ideas of just, how did we structure the handover information? We created folders that were just, on Windows Explorer, but these folders were elemental based. So, if the boiler broke down, you didn't have to look for the subcontractor installed the boiler. It was just under boiler, and all the information for that boiler was there. And then that could then be linked to spreadsheets, for asset registers, and then even, we could then link to the element in the model. And from a sort of more information theory point of view, having everybody on board, from the start means that, there's none of this creating information and then halfway through when another consultant comes on board, scrapping it, starting again. There was no creating information purely for tendering of the contractor. So all that time and money that gets put into that for one purpose was removed. There was the big sort of contractual barriers were removed. So, in terms of being the architect, we were able to talk to the supply chain, which was amazing. In terms of the design, we could design it with having the cost and time knowledge of the constructor and the actual sort of real sort of technical detail of the specialists and subcontractors there from the start. So we were designing, just the once. The sort of idea of value engineering wasn't required anymore, and we could look at sort of elements in terms of their life cycle cost rather than just capital costs. And also in terms of information, we could actually reduce 20% of information we produce, because a lot of actually what we produce on projects is solely for what I call arse covering. We create so many emails, where we copy the world in, just to cover our own backs, to blame people. When things went wrong, because it was a no blame culture, there was none of this forensic analysing of what happened when and who was to blame. All that time, required for that, we actually put into actually solving the problems and working together. But also, in terms of construction and on site, design and construction was much more merged. There wasn't that big black hole in between where, information seems to get sucked down and it doesn't then come back onto site. And the ideas of then, actually having a feedback loop from on site, because, we spend so much time creating these 3D models that are perfect, and, we've done all the clash detection. But actually, then you get on site, well, things happen, that there'll be things that we've not thought about, and things will go out of tolerance. at the moment there isn't that feedback loop, which then updates the model with actual the physical build, and there's so much more sort of potential around that, which I think IPI gives the framework for. Having that alliance in place, there's so many sort of ideas there, and so many benefits. And actually on the IPI project, the client actually went back. So there is actually another IPI project with the same client. So they obviously saw the benefits. In terms of handover, you've got very sort of well-defined criteria, and you can't actually hand over the building without actually meeting those requirements. So kind of this idea of soft landings, it's all sort of inbuilt within this procurement model. It's not an add-on, it's just fundamentally part of it. And part of the actual sort of procurement framework, because it's not based around REBA stages either, it's all sort of bespoke. And there's much more of the whole sort of commissioning and the actual testing of the physical assets, that is so much more inbuilt within the program. You have to have this defined sort of time to do that. You can't hand over the building without it. On sort of projects, design and build, that tends to be the bit that gets squished and squished and squished until, you've only got a few days maybe to do it. For me, this is why I kind of push this way of working, because me, as an information manager, it makes sense, and I can't get the value out of what I do, the value out of the technology without this being in place.
You've just given a valued argument for everyone to change the way that they work. Now, from my perspective, I kind of asked one question, and the one question being, in terms of costs, are the clients truly seeing the savings from the efficiencies in terms of the less information that's created essentially as waste, and the no one's having a go with regards to the pricing? They in terms of actually winning the project, is the project still won with a reasonable brief in place that the client has, so that the team can put a reasonable pricing against it in terms of a fee, and obviously against a recognised construction cost?
Yes, so the sort of the actual selection side of it, it's not based upon who's the cheapest. It's all based upon everything else that you can offer as well. We actually found on the project that where if people had been procured on cost, then that's kind of where it fell down a little bit, because people weren't in that right mindset to actually work in an alliance, and that's kind of where sometimes that fell down. You get what you pay for at the end of the day, and the clients, had some bad experiences, like many clients do, in terms of what happens after the project finishes. For the client, there's actually sort of less risk really. They're part of the alliance, and I think they get sort of great benefits because that they're getting the asset that they actually wanted, because it can't actually hand over without being compared to that sort of criteria.
I think that's one thing that we'll struggle with in Australia with government funded projects still. There's obviously a value that's attributed to extra skills or value adding that you can deliver to a project, but unfortunately most projects here are still based upon a minimum viable project. So it's about delivering against the minimum requirements. So it'd be interesting to see that change moving into the future here in Australia. Now, in my role, I'm currently a director or an owner of an architectural practice, and I'm rather risk averse. And I guess one of the things that I guess I struggle with, and this is just kind of it's not trying to beat down on the concept of integrated project insurance projects or alliances, but I actually struggle with the concept of shared risk and reward. Personally, it's because if I am highly competent, but the builder, for one reason or another, isn't competent at his end and makes a huge mistake, I then become liable for that mistake. Do you have any advice that you give people like myself that have that fear that could help remove it?
I think if the mistake was that big, it wouldn't just come out of the blue. You'd be building up to it. You're all working together. It's open book. It's transparent. The fact that it's no blame as well means that if you do make a mistake, you can own up to it really early on, rather than hiding it away. So it then snowballs into a much bigger mistake, which tends to happen. Because on sort of more traditional projects, if you make a mistake, you hide it. You don't want to tell anybody about it. So we were encouraged to be open about that. And there was no huge mistakes that happened at all. With the whole sort of shared pain and gain share, that's what that's the incentive. That's what binds you as a team. You're working together, for that shared goal. The actual sort of risk and the pain and the gain share isn't, it's not. It doesn't necessarily have to be shared equally. It can be based upon, the size of your business. So you're not actually having a risk that's too big for you to actually take on. I think having that in place is really important, and it's actually linked as well to the risk and opportunity register. So this is actually really important on types of projects, and this is actually created really early on as you're actually defining the target cost. It's linked to it. It's actually linked. The risk is linked to the pain, and the opportunities are linked to the gain. So the actual risks are known much earlier on in the project. And because they're known, you can put steps in to mitigate those risks really early on. And also the opportunities. We talk a lot about risk, but we never talk about opportunities on projects, and actually realising those opportunities to actually give us, more of a reward at the end of it. And if just because it's collaborative as well, if one sort of team member isn't pulling their weight, isn't performing, this isn't, an environment where you're scared to actually, challenge people, or it's not just about, it's not about hugs and all that type of thing. If people aren't performing, then, they can be booted out the project, if that's an issue. It's an alliance at the end of the day, and everybody's got an equal say, and if the alliance feels that someone isn't performing, then they can be, struck off the project.
I'm hoping that's the case. But you've almost convinced me. You've almost convinced me.
And also in terms of the supply chain. So, what happens on sort of standard projects is that, the risk gets pushed down to the supply chain, and they're kind of suffocated by this risk all the time. It's there.
Yep.
And there's never any opportunity for them to think about doing things differently, for them to innovate, for them to try new things on site. And this form of procurement allows that. It allows us to actually work with the subcontractors and ask them, what would you do differently? Where do you think the efficiencies could be made? At the moment, we're kind of forgetting about that side of things. And I think a lot more work needs to be done in terms of the supply chain.
Before we go back and kind of summarize everything we've talked about, because there's been a lot to digest in this chat, but I guess one key thing for clients right now to understand is the procurement of digital deliverables. So right now we're going to talk about contracts or procurement methodologies that aren't in an integrated alliancing component, and it's still following along a similar line of design, bid, build, or design and construct. Now, in the new ISO standard, 19650, there are opportunities, I guess, along that supply chain of multiple appointing parties. Do you want to talk about why that could be the case?
So, it's not just the main client who has information requirements, and they should use those requirements to then procure their team to deliver those. That was always in the old standards, really. It was just, I think, a bit too subtle for most people to understand, and we're still not really seeing that at the moment in terms of bids from main clients. In terms of them defining their information requirements to select their team. So that's the main client as the appointing party. But then there's everybody else then once selected on the team who have information requirements and who then also select people to work for them. So, they still have information requirements. So they still need to use those information requirements to select the best people to then deliver them for them. So, the contractor is kind of a really good example of that. The contractor, as part of ISO 19650, has, exchange information requirements. And, what they're meant to do is it's meant to take parts of, the parts of the main client's requirements and kind of use them in their own, and then you get this cascade down the chain. Everybody who needs information always has requirements, and they're based on a purpose. And to get the people to deliver those requirements, you need to be very explicit when selecting the team in terms of getting the right people to deliver those. And we're just not doing that at the moment properly. We're not seeing the value of those information requirements in procurement, in terms of main client, in terms of contractor, or even in terms of design consultants as well, because they also select people, specialists to work for them. And at the moment we procure people, and there's a mismatch of what we want and what they can deliver. So what ISO 19650 starts to do is actually starts to say, right, you've got to start thinking really hard about your information requirements and the people who are going to deliver those. It's very much more upfront. A lot of work needs to go into defining those requirements and then actually using them to select the team with. And if you do all that properly, then the actual sort of the strategy side, the planning and the delivery is actually much more simpler, because you've got the right people on board from the start to do that.
And I guess the key thing that I look at with regards to this is quite a simple one, and my example would be along the lines of, say, for example, structural engineer. Now, the information that a structural engineer would need to provide to a client would be very minimal in terms of their level of information need, as we call it now. But the information that a structural engineer would need from their fellow consultants, being the architect, in knowing the design of the building, and the services engineers to know the penetrations and the loading of their equipment that would be sitting on their structure. That would be the information requirements that particular consultant would need, that would be unique to one that the client would need. That's that how you'd see it as well?
Yes, definitely. I mean, that kind of goes across sort of different sort of delivery teams or task teams, but yes, definitely, and that's what we need to get better at talking about. That's for me what information management is all about, is understanding exactly what everyone's needs are, what information they need to satisfy those needs. At the moment, we just don't do it, and it's very ad hoc. And coming from a modelling background, I know how incredibly complex putting information into a model is. And I need, from that perspective, you need to know exactly what you want, so you can actually create the modelling strategies in place right from the start to actually be able to deliver those. It's no good like at the moment, in terms of when the contractor comes on board halfway through a project, the QS asking for certain types of information, at that stage, when really you needed to know that at the start, because you could have started building those objects in a way that delivered that, or setting the standards in terms of the model to help deliver it. And that's just one sort of purpose and use for information. It's everything is based around purposes and use. And until what we seem to do at the moment is we seem to delve into the detail straight away, but you can't actually define the detail until you've defined those purposes. And for me, that's kind of another real big key message that I'm hoping the new ISO will get across to people, that it's all based around purposes.
So we've covered a lot today, Emma, and I've let you go and had a lot of fun hearing your views on everything. But I guess I want to try and cover it off in a summary, or I guess a summation of how I've taken the information that you've provided today. So from a procurement standpoint for clients, the first key thing is if they want information, they ask for the information at the right time. So they're actually defining their information requirements before they actually engage in any procurement or contract with any delivery team across the project. That's the first step.
Yep.
Now, secondly, if we take a step back and assume for the time being that the majority of projects will still be delivered using procurement methodologies that are kind of similar to the way in which we deliver them now and not under integrated project insurance, that as long as the information requirements are clearly defined, there shouldn't be much need for a change to the way in which your contracts are documented. And I'm going to put a huge disclaimer on that and say, please seek legal advice. I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah, I'm not a contract expert in any means at all.
No, so we probably shouldn't say that at all. But the key thing about it is that the most important thing to be aware of is that as long as you're stipulating what you're wanting, then
yes,
it's a matter of speaking to your legal team about the way that the contracts are written and ensure that they understand that those requirements are incorporated into the deliverable requirements of that contract.
Yeah.
And I guess finally, my final summation would be regarding integrated project delivery or integrated project insurance projects and alliances that they may become the way of the future, and our clients may see savings due to the fact that there's less digital waste or less waste created because we're actually working as a team from day one. Would you say that summarised our discussion so far, or is there anything I missed?
I know. So in terms of the IPI, it's obviously not just about digital. It's about everything.
Yes.
Every part of a project, it changes. It's completely different. And for me, it just makes sense to work that way. Because I think if we actually described the way we currently work to an alien, they would look at us gone out. You do what? You create a design, and then you get somebody else then to do it, and they might start again, and that knowledge from before isn't then passed on, and we just overcomplicate things, I think. Keep it simple.
That sounds like a new T-shirt for me for next year. So Emma, thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us today and discuss the processes of procuring digital deliverables and information. So I have one final question, and one that I've been asking all of my guests. What does BIM mean to you?
That's a very good question. It seems to change every day.
Well, what does it mean to you today?
No, it's always, for me, it's always about information management, and it's been like that for years. It's about all information, but it's also about how we move to more structured digital information and how we define it, procure it, plan it, deliver, and then ultimately check it. It's all about inputs and outputs, but also it's also about promoting digital literacy within construction. And I see that's kind of another one of my sort of roles, and trying to alter people's mindsets towards information and using technology. And one of the things that kind of frustrates me at the moment is that, in our everyday lives, we're quite happy to use, certain sort of features online in terms of shopping. So, we'll quite happily filter and sort and search for things. But when we try and apply that then to a construction project, on a document management system, people seem to go out of their minds, and it's too difficult. So, for me, it really is that sort of helping people on their journey and trying to give them context and understanding of why we're doing what we're doing and why we need to change. So, probably a really long-winded answer there, but yeah.
I can't turn that into a soundbite, but thanks once again, Emma, for your time. So for more information on Emma Hooper and Bond Bryan Digital, please head to our website where you can find links to read more about them. I look forward to sharing our next podcast in a fortnight's time. Until then, good luck with your digital transition. If you would like assistance with your digital transition, please contact us at digital@fultontrotter.com.au. For more information, or if you'd like to continue the discussion in the comments section, head over to our website, thedigitaltransition.com. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on our future podcasts. We would also appreciate it if you provide us with a rating and take the time to provide us with a review. Thanks for listening to The Digital Transition, brought to you by Fulton Trotter Digital. The Digital Transition.